Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. 100 years ago, at the corner of Bush and Tazewell Streets in Norfolk, stood the Colonial Theater, the theater where the film Birth of a Nation debuted in the South. Birth of a Nation is considered one of the most important American films ever made, despite the fact that it depicted African Americans, especially black men, as foolish, dangerous, predatory, and in need of being controlled or even killed. But the creative community fought back, and up next on Another View, we'll tell you all about Birth of an Answer. Another View is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Birth of a Nation is an adaptation of Thomas Dixon's best-selling novel, The Klansman, a historical romance of the Ku Klux Klan, published in 1905. The film was groundbreaking in its visual storytelling and is considered one of the greatest and most important American films ever made. It's also one of the most racist. And African-American artists and activists fought back. And today, we have Birth of an Answer, celebrating 100 years of African-American creative responses to Birth of a Nation. So let's meet our guests who are going to talk about this today. Vandora Williams is Associate Professor of Journalism and Communications at Hampton University. Hi, Vandora.
Hello.
And also one of our alum here at WHRO,
Yes.
so welcome home.
Good to be back.
Dr. Sarah Florini is Assistant Professor of Communications and Theater Arts at Old Dominion University. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. Super happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. And Old Dominion University is a catalyst behind Birth of an Answer, and we're going to talk more about that. And we are so honored to have Mr. Tim Reed, an award-winning director, producer, actor. What else? Hi, Tim.
I don't do windows.
You don't do windows. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you're going to be a part of a incredible panel tonight talking about the rise in films and in black films and so forth. So we appreciate you being here with us today. So before we get started, for those of you in our audience who may not be as familiar with Birth of a Nation, our Lisa Godley put together a retrospective.
It's been 100 years since Birth of a Nation stirred the great American melting pot. The film was praised for utilizing never-before-seen movie-making techniques. At the same time, deemed notoriously racist, portraying actors in blackface as villains and Ku Klux Klansmen as heroes. The film portrayed blacks as clownish, unable to function without guidance, or as savages who were out of control. There were movements to block screenings, including an unsuccessful campaign here in Norfolk. Across the country, the March 1915 release sparked lawsuits, picketing, even riots, which seemed to only fuel the film's appeal at the box office, making it one of the biggest moneymakers of its time. Birth of a Nation showed how Hollywood could shape public attitudes about race. It set the stage for a movement to change the way blacks were portrayed on film and was a catalyst to the black film movement. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
So, Tim, I want to start with you because back when you've been making films longer than the rest of us on this panel.
On this earth longer than the rest.
But when you were in school and when you were learning about film, did you study Birth of a Nation? And if you did, how was it taught and how did it make you feel as an African American?
Well, I actually didn't study film in school.
Oh.
It was not my interest at all. Mm-hmm. At the time that I was at Norfolk State, and then Norfolk Division of Virginia State, I was very involved in the civil rights movement in this area. So we were in the resistance movement. And it wasn't about integration. It was about separate but equal. And that's the area of my exposure to movies like that. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at them, already in my heart, they were the negative stereotypes that we had to do something about. So I came in as as an activist, and as I didn't really understand the power of films such as Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, and Mississippi Burning, 12 Years a Slave, and all those. I didn't understand the psychology and the propaganda power until I found myself just indirectly, somehow, in the entertainment business. And for over the past 40 years, I have had the pleasure and sometimes the pain of being exposed to the inside actions of people who control the images around this world. And sometimes I found myself in the room and I had to be quiet to listen and to understand what they really meant by the word propaganda. And then once, actually, the father of television gave me my impetus, gave me an understanding of what I had to do. It was sort of like I had my epiphany sitting in the office of William Paley, who created television with the Columbia Broadcasting System. Evening News, Playhouse. I mean, he was the father of television as we know it. And I was sitting in his office, the last actor who had ever been invited to his office, not since Jackie Gleason, I'm told. And we were talking about a show that he loved that I had done called Frank's Place. And we chatted for a bit. And then all of a sudden, he became very sober. And he looked at me, and he was sitting with the sun behind him coming through this huge window. And I could see a silhouette. It's like I was looking at God. And he said to me, I have but one question, young man. And I said, what is that, sir? He said, what is your propaganda? And when he said that, a lightning bolt went through my head, my heart, and I was like almost in the Scene Network where I'm saying, I think I may seen God.
Wow.
It was almost like I saw the truth of not only the business that I was in, why I am where I am at this instant. And from that moment to this, I became a cultural propagandist. Using that, I went back and looked at Birth of a Nation. I spent most of the time looking at Thomas Dixon, who was a profound racist and created so many things, not just Birth of a Nation, but he created the first film about the Red Scare. He created the fear of communism in America through a book that outsold Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation sold 5 million copies at that time. The other book, and I'm trying to think of it, was not called The Red Scare, but he fostered. One of his mentors was Joseph McCarthy. This guy did more damage in terms of hate and race in America than just about any author at that time up to recent time that I've ever known. So using that trail, what I learned at Norfolk State was to go back and find the beginning, find who heads the machine, find what is the purpose. So what I discovered for my own choice was that the real purpose was to destroy the positive effects of Reconstruction. The images of blacks that are in this movie that everybody thinks that's what we look like, that's what we were, are all lies. Now today, some of them would be true, but back then they were all lies. They were trying to destroy the images that had been created in 11 years of Reconstruction. So the whole purpose, and the most racist president we've ever had from Virginia, Woodrow Wilson, took aid to that. He was Dixon was the Billy Graham to Woodrow Wilson and several presidents. They then used that propaganda to destroy the progress of what we would call the first integration movement.
Let me ask you something. You made a statement. You said today some of that would be true.
Yeah.
Can you clarify?
Yeah, some of the images that we see that we are producing for ourselves would fall right into the same kind of image producing negative propaganda, cultural propaganda that was produced by people such as Dixon. They're produced by us now.
Now that we're producing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. And we're going to get into that. But Vandora, when you're teaching then about the use of media and culture and so forth, what do you teach your students? How do they perceive in 2015 versus when you were coming up and also in your studies? Because I know you're working on a doctorate on this very image.
Yes. So when just like with Tim, I tell my students to go back and look at what type of imagery, where did it come from? And interestingly enough, last semester, I taught a documentary class where I had my students watch film Birth of a Nation, and then to tell them, okay, I want you to create a response, a documentary response to the film. Now, I was dealing with millennials, so it took it was a challenge to get them to watch a 3-hour silent film. But once they got to the second half and they saw the negative imagery and the stereotypes about African Americans, they were able to make the connection to some of the things that they saw when they were growing up. And then they started to say, oh, that's where it came from. That's where it started. So, well, not where it started, but because
Close.
It was very close, because I say that Birth of a Nation, it had a lot of ugliness encased in beauty. And that ugliness was that the racism and the stereotypes
Beauty,
that really
framing.
Well, the fine art.
Yes.
It was considered fine art at that time.
Composition.
Right. So once they began to see that, then they were able to make the connection and to deal with how they look at imagery today and how it's interpreted. So that was one of the things that I had to deal with, and I found it a very, very instructing to go through with with my students on that. And in my dissertation, I had a lot of study dealing with how did the local Hampton Roads community respond to it, specifically the Black community. And I just want to let you know, I'm still in the process of doing the research, but what I found so far, I find absolutely fascinating that Norfolk was the first Southern city to exhibit the film.
Right, because Thomas had a connection here.
Thomas Dixon was extremely popular. They adopted him as their native son.
He's one of the most popular people in America.
Very much. He had a play. The play for the Klansman was here. His books and everything were here. He even preached at some churches here because he was a Baptist minister.
He's a Billy Graham of that era.